the scene. He's got the voice that's mean, asking those questions that you never seen. He's got that fire, burning bright and clean. Andrew Keen making waves, break the routine on the Keen on show. He brings the heat, asking the minds, digging deep till they bleed. No sugar-coated truths, no lies to deceive. Andrew Keen, the master of the interview beat. He's got the knowledge, he's got the flair, challenging ideas with a fearless stare. With every question, he's uncovering what's there. Andrew Keen, a truth seeker, he's aware.
Hello, everybody. As America reels from the failed assassination attempt on the life of Donald Trump, all sorts of conspiracy theories, both on the left and the right, about the shooter and who was behind it. My guest today is a CNN correspondent, the author of, I think, a very important new book, Black Pill: How I Witnessed the Darkest Corners of the Internet Come to Life, Poison Society, and Capture American Politics. It's by CNN reporter Elle Reeve. Elle is joining us from the CNN offices in New York. Elle, does all the conspiracy hysteria around this failed assassination attempt, does it reflect a lot of the themes in your book?
You mean the people who have invented conspiracy theories about whether it was staged, that kind of thing?
Well, what appears, I mean, maybe I will look stupid if it comes to pass that it was a conspiracy. I somehow doubt it.
Right. Sure. I mean, there's an element of people almost have fun in this kind of participatory conspiracy theory creation and development in a way that before social media they couldn't do. That is one of the appeals of QAnon. It's not just that you get this satisfying secret knowledge. It's you get to create it. You get to look for clues and put it all together and package it to mean something.
So it's a democratized ontology.
Right. Right.
The conspiracy theories this time around are both on the left and the right. Some people believe it was a leftist plot, others a conservative plot. Your book, Black Pill, is about right-wing paranoia conspiracies. Is that because it's mostly on the right, or did you just choose to write Black Pill about right-wing, the right-wing darkest corners of the internet?
Most domestic terrorism is right-wing or white nationalist domestic terrorism. So that is part of it. I got pulled into it. I was reporting on a cartoonist, a political cartoonist, and it took me on to 4chan, this anonymous website that is the heart of the dark heart of the internet, is what people called it before there seemed to be so many murders that came out of it. And I was looking at these postings that these kids were doing. They were kind of competing to troll a Microsoft chatbot called Tay that was an AI that would learn to talk like a teenager based on how people interacted with it. And they were working together to turn her into a Nazi, to get her to repeat that she loved Hitler, that she thought the Holocaust was good, that kind of thing. And the only real organizing principle was each person was trying to one up the last. And they were able to work in concert together in a way that was extremely effective. Microsoft took down the chatbot within 18 hours. And seeing that white nationalism was alive and well, not just with the very poor and uneducated in some far off place, but with young people who are very tech savvy and who are clever. I mean, these kids weren't stupid. That's how I got into reporting it.
You're focused on the here and now, but we've done many shows, or many books now on the history of right-wing nationalism, extremist right-wing movements. We did one a couple of weeks ago with John Gantz. I'm sure you know his new book, When the Clock Broke, which focuses on David Duke. We've done some other shows actually on Duke becoming a mainstream political figure in the 90s in New Orleans, in Louisiana. What's your analysis of the history, Ellie, of this movement? Did it just come about with the emergence of 4chan? or can we trace it back to Duke and perhaps even before Duke, back to perhaps the KKK?
Oh, sure. It's been around a long time. One of the sources that my sources cite is George Lincoln Rockwell. He was a neo-Nazi who would go to college campuses and say extremely provocative, offensive things with the intention of getting the students to be really, really angry. And he would play off their rage. They would shout at him, they would heckle him, and then he would get them to listen to him. He would interact with them so that they would listen to his pitch. This was considered genius by the young alt-right activists that I was interviewing in Charlottesville. Of course, the white nationalism of David Duke is very important, but by the Bush administration, early Obama administration, old white nationalist leaders told me the movement was dead. They just weren't getting any traction. A leader of a neo-Nazi group, the National Socialist Movement, his name was Jeff Scoop, and he told me about how he had worked very hard to find neo-Nazis when he was a teenager. He'd found an old academic book that had studied white nationalism, and in the back there was an index with addresses of all these people that had been interviewed by the author. So one by one, he wrote them letters asking for their literature, and they were slow to respond, or they had very outdated materials. He was very frustrated by it before he was finally able to connect with what became the National Socialist Movement. But starting around 2014, when the alt-right really got going, it became much more focused on the internet. Like, geography didn't matter. You could connect to people all over the world, really. And it brought in a much younger and a different audience, a much more upscale audience. So Scoop had complained to me that he thought the new guys coming into the white nationalist movement were girly boys, that they were trying to look like they were rich, when he had been so focused on looking tough. I mean, like, he wore like reinforced gloves, like he wanted to look like a brawler. And so that like sort of suburban middle class audience is what really blew up in the late 2010s. And it's just a very sharp change from what the movement had been.
You use the term neo-Nazi, not neo-fascist, because in terms of the tensions between the newbies and the founders, are there elements which are similar to what happened in the German nationalist socialist movement of the 1920s? Of course, eventually the Night of the Long Knives, the purging of the old guard. Do you see very direct connections with the growth of Nazism in Germany in the 20s?
We live in certainly different economic circumstances, but the element of young men wanting to be together and getting in street fights together, that remains the same. So does the whispers in this world of who might be gay, right? The gossip about who among them might secretly be in the closet is a powerful weapon when you're trying to knife your adversary. So in a way, I mean, essentially these guys are always trying to be like the stormtroopers. They want to go from being online like user groups into being someone in the real world. Sometimes they work out together, like they're constantly trying to make it into the real world, but it's not easy. And they're often almost embarrassed at what they look like in person.
Yeah, I have a photo for people watching. If I look like that, I'd be embarrassed too.
Well, now that guy,
Oh,
he's not a white nationalist.
Well, he's what you imagine a white nationalist to be. Maybe.
Exactly, but it's completely wrong. I mean,
Okay.
sure, there are some guys like that now, but a lot of them look like, insurance adjusters, little white polos.
Well, probably more like Spencer, yeah?
Yeah, well, that's what they want to be. And there's a lot of drama. I know this sounds very silly and superficial, but there's often a lot of drama among them over whether they're attractive enough. They're very self-conscious about their weight. White nationalist Matt Parrott recently published a very long essay about his struggles with his obesity.
How coherent, Ellie, is there neo-Nazism? How familiar are they with the, I guess in their eyes, the accomplishments of the Nazis? And what is it about Nazism that so attracts them? Is it hatred of Jews? Is it violence? Is it male camaraderie?
Okay, so I described Jeff Scoop as a neo-Nazi because they literally wore like rip-off German brown shoe uniforms. They wore swastika armbands, but he was kind of seen as like an old school, outdated style. A lot of these guys are very well read. They've read a lot of a Romanian fascist, Codreanu.
The man on the white horse, very
Right.
romantic figure.
Right. That's they've read Julius Evola. They're not. The Richard Spencer is particularly obsessed with Nietzsche and believes himself to be completing Nietzsche's project with the book that he's working on. He's currently trying to create a new religion to counter Christianity that would be a cult of the god Apollo that would value beauty and intellect over the Nietzschean slave morality of Christianity.
Hitler's already done that, hasn't he?
I guess I say all that to say, like, these guys do read. They're not idiots. They're not uneducated. They have bad ideas. Like, you can be smart and believe very stupid things.
Yeah, you had I know for the book, you spent some time both with Spencer and with Frederick Brennan, from 8chan. How did you get access to them? Were they a bit suspicious of you as a mainstream media type?
So Fred Brennan, he had started to question what he had done by the first time I reached out to him, which was in 2018. He had founded 8chan, which was to be this anonymous place with almost no rules on what could be said. And the idea was the marketplace of ideas would bring the best ideas to the top. But it didn't work out like that. It became a place where the Christchurch shooter posted his manifesto. The El Paso shooter posted his manifesto. It became where QAnon that was the heart of QAnon. So he was already starting to question it in 2018 when I reached out to him. And I flew out. He had resigned from the company, and I flew out to the Philippines to interview him. And a lot of people like this have seen really crazy stuff. I mean, they may have done terrible things in their past, but it doesn't mean they're not disturbed by them. So Fred Brennan, he had what they call in pro wrestling, a face turn. He set out to destroy this monster that he had created. So maintaining a relationship with him wasn't difficult. He wanted to talk through what he'd experienced and what he'd seen. As for the white nationalists, that's a lot more hostile. There's a lot of misogyny in that movement that can be very, very angry. And, the first time I talk to them, it often means like a long time of extreme hostility, but then they sort of calm themselves down and will tell me things. And at this point, I've just been around so long documenting what they're doing that they accept my presence. There was a 6-week-long federal civil trial in 2021 in which about 24 defendants were made to be accountable for what they'd done in Charlottesville. And it was that point where they were being forced to look at what they'd done, the messages, the planning, everything they had known in advance, what they did afterwards. They really had to look at what they had done, look at the people they had hurt, while a jury of their peers were judging them. And it put them in a contemplative mood. So, for example, I was able to go to a house that the white nationalist Matt Parrott and Matt Heimbach had rented with their lawyer, who is a gay Jewish Holocaust denier. And they just told me everything. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. There's this way we were in Charlottesville in 2017 when, a woman was murdered, where there is this torch march that ended in a melee. And there's this element of being like, did you see that? Were you there when this happened? Were you on that street when that happened? It's like as if we were soldiers on opposite sides of the war. There just aren't that many people who have experienced the same things.
The subtitle of your new book, Ellie Black Pill, is How I Witnessed the Darkest Corners of the Internet Come to Life, Poison Society, and Capture American Politics. I know authors don't always come up with their own subtitles, but that's a very bold assumption. Poison Society and Capture American Politics. You've mentioned Charlottesville. You haven't said anything yet about January 6th. I mean, Charlottesville was certainly not one of the best moments in American history, but it was a single event. Do you stick by that subtitle? Do you believe that the darkest corners of the internet have really poisoned society and captured American politics?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to speak to the attempted assassination of Donald Trump because
leave that one. Yeah.
We don't know enough about what that person did, but there have been many, many mass shootings based on the ideas that were built on these tiny little websites that at the time the people using them didn't think would ever amount to anything. But the language of it has infiltrated the mainstream. You see Tucker Carlson going shopping in Russia to show what a wonderful place it is. You see Fox News talking about the Great Replacement. Now in that version of it, the idea is that Democrats are importing immigrants in order to get more voters and control the American government. But the alt-right's version of the Great Replacement was that Jews are importing people of color in order to dilute and control the white race. Nick Fuentes still talks about it. He was talking about that recently. Fuentes has had dinner with Donald Trump. Everywhere I look, I see fragments of this culture, even if the specific people who were leaders of it 10 years ago, 7 years ago, have been marginalized. So, for example, recently the fascist group Patriot Front, which was founded by a man who was in Charlottesville, it's a fascist group. They marched in Nashville anonymously with these kind of red, white, and blue shields. They look like they're trying to be comic book heroes or something. And Senator Mike Lee of Utah tweeted that he had never heard of them and speculated maybe they were a false flag. And so maybe Mike Lee has never heard of Patriot Front and didn't bother to Google it. But his Twitter handle is Based Mike Lee. Based is slang from this exact same subculture that Patriot Front came out of.
Ellie, the Republicans, of course, have their convention this week in Milwaukee. I've been watching, not too closely, but from the shots, I don't see anyone wearing Nazi flags. I don't see anyone wanting to destroy the Jews or anything like that. How much is this really infiltrated? I mean, you can mention, of course, Congress people, you can mention individuals, but how much is this really infiltrated, in your view, mainstream Republican politics, the mainstream Republican Party? Do you think that that Trump himself is somehow a representative of all this?
Well, they called Trump their God Emperor. They didn't think he was one of them. He was more like their icon. No, and I think there's a really important distinction to draw here between, I look at both the white nationalists and the QAnon types. So the white nationalists, they thought America was bad because it wasn't racist enough. They wanted America to be more racist. They called themselves racists. The QAnon types do not feel that way. They think America is not racist and that that's a good thing. They think that efforts to make America less racist, ideas like systemic racism, that those are a fraud, that they're bad because they're seeking to address something that's not real. And I think that distinction is very important. The enemy at the heart of the sort of QAnon and like QAnon light movement is pedophiles, which is a much more palatable enemy for a lot more people than Jews. So, I mean, I just see the elements of it all over our politics. The first person who ever sent me a picture of Drag Queen Story Hour was a teenage fascist troll in 2017. And last year, it just becomes the center of like what's being talked about on Fox News. There's many state pieces of state legislation meant to restrict trans rights. Marjorie Taylor Greene made a joke about transgender people in her speech at the RNC. I mean, like, it's everywhere. The white nationalists, so the alt-right's political platform, you know, it wasn't just about being racist. They wanted a more generous welfare state, less foreign wars, and and an end to immigration for 50 years. Peaceful ethnic cleansing is what they called it. Now, you don't see that coming from the RNC, but you do see the RNC platform saying no cuts to Social Security or Medicare, no more World War III, that it would have the largest deportation operation in history. I mean, like, they've taken that platform. It's astounding to me. That doesn't mean that they're secretly wanting to be more racist against Black people or something like that, but the influence is there.
How much of these people, in your view, infiltrated other institutions? You've talked a little bit about the Republican Party, the police, for example, and the military, both very important institutions.
Well, the experience I have with police would be around the 2020 protests in the wake of the death of George Floyd. I was in the Pacific Northwest quite a bit. I was in Seattle, where protesters had taken over a police precinct area and declared it cop-free. They called it the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, the CHAZ. And I was talking to a police officer extensively at that time, and no, he's not a neo-Nazi or far-right guy, but I did notice him digging deeper and deeper online into these kind of Reddit rabbit holes, where at the time he imagined like Antifa was going to take over, that there would be massive rioting in the streets, that there would be some kind of revolution. And I thought that his overestimation of the power of this relatively small, loosely organized leftist group just was a demonstration of how easily, like, this like internet subculture can warp your perception of the reality that's right outside your front door.
Some people might be watching this, Ellie, and saying, well, why is Antifa different? If we had a conservative, a mainstream conservative on, they might be arguing that that Antifa is a mirror on the world that you observed in the dark web. Is that completely wrong?
I do talk about anti-fascists and the anti-police protesters from back then a bit. I don't think they're morally the same, but I did see a lot of the same elements playing out among them. So they were organized online in these chat rooms. So every night there would be a protest somewhere, and you would find out where this was because someone would forward you basically a little meme that would have the time and the location. But it was never very clear who made it or why that place was picked, to the point that one time, like, some protesters accused me of setting up one of their protests, which was absurd and ridiculous. They started to trust each other. They trust these people they made online as though they were their best friends and comrades without actually ever knowing them, which is another thing I saw play out with the alt-right. And in these chat rooms, they talked themselves into violence. Like, they talked themselves into thinking violent revolution was necessary, to the point where I was like asking this kid, like, do you know anyone who is in the Iraq War? Like, do you know anyone who has seen someone shot in the street? Do you know anyone who has ever seen a city destroyed by violence? And of course he said no. I mean, I like, it had just become his world, like the conventional wisdom of his peer group, without a lot of like rigorous debate. And over time, they realized that they had trusted people they shouldn't have trusted. There was one person who told me this very fabulous story about how some gang members were angry at the anti-fascist, and so he had offered his body as tribute. You know, he's like, you can beat me up instead of beating up the anti-fascists, and told me that the gangsters had done so and that they had used phone books to conceal the bruises. And I thought that was a pretty strange story. I ran it by a police officer. He hadn't heard of anything like that happening. And about a year later, these kids come back to me and say, like, yeah, you know, we think actually he was faking cancer. So, you know, then in the Chaz, I mean, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the story. They had created this perimeter of security because they were so afraid the Proud Boys were coming to hurt them. And this rumor would spread through the crowd all the time, like the Proud Boys are 2 hours away.
Making the comparison with the Nazis, Ellie, many of the early Nazis were ex-servicemen.
Mm-hmm.
Are most of these people just online games players?
Yeah.
People who haven't been in the military?
Yeah. I mean, I have interviewed 2 people, one guy who's in the National Guard but never deployed overseas, and one guy who did deploy to Afghanistan. But I mean, we don't have the draft anymore. There are far fewer people who've done that service. It is just a smaller population to draw from. And yeah, no, I'd say their war experience is Call of Duty.
Yeah, I know you're doing an event with Elliot Abrams. Maybe you've already done it. He's been on the show a couple of times, ex-serviceman. I think he'll have an interesting take on this. We're talking with Elle Reeve, the author of Black Pill, How I Witnessed the Darkest Corners of the Internet Come to Life, Poison Society, and Capture American Politics. Could take I want to talk, Ellie, about what we're going to do about this or how to address it in a second. But I want to remind everyone that great guests like Elle Reeve, the CNN correspondent, are brought to us because of our friends at Liberties, an excellent new quarterly of culture and politics. Going to run a short feature on Liberties, and then we'll be back with Ellie to figure out how we're going to get rid of the black pill, how we're going to stop it, because it doesn't sound very attractive. So we'll be back in a second.
The noise, there is nuance, insight. Liberties is not just a journal of ideas. It's a meteor of intelligent substance. It's the place to be for engaged citizens. Politics, opinion, substance. Liberties is a triumph for freedom of thought. A quarterly of urgency, of cultural exploration, of intellectual delight, of immaculate prose. It's invaluable. Subscribe now or find Liberties at your favorite bookseller.
And you can subscribe to Liberties at libertiesjournal.com. We're speaking with Elle Reeve, the author of Black Pill. Ellie, you were on CNN with your colleague, Jake Tapper. He was on our show a couple of months ago talking about loneliness as a white nationalist movement entry point. Can many of the problems with our digital revolution, isolation, atomization, are they at the root of this problem?
It's what I hear from them over and over and over again, for sure. Fred Brennan, the founder of 8chan, he has brittle bone disease. He lived in a wheelchair. He couldn't, just the smallest touch can break his bones. And then he was in foster care. He was really isolated, and the internet brought the world to him. But he was very upset about his disability. His question is a question you can imagine having yourself. Why do I have to live like this? Why is this my state of being? But he asked that question of a bunch of Nazis on 4chan, and their answer was because your mother was allowed to have you, and that disabled people should be sterilized. And he internalized that idea. I mean, he was 12, 13 years old. So how could he have known any better? He didn't have anyone to guide him. A former Proud Boy named Russell Schultz told me that a lot of the guys who joined that group wanted to feel like they had a wingman, like they had a guy who had their back. If they got in a fight in a bar, there'd be somebody to back them up. And they'd never had that in their lives before. And that's what they were looking for.
Where's family here? Where's community?
Where's family? Some of them have difficult relationships with their parents. A lot of the incels, the involuntarily celibate types, believe they have a distant father and an overindulgent mother. That's what one told me. I don't know, whatever it is, they're not getting what they need from their parents.
So can we blame the parents? Not that we're looking for blame here. It's too simplistic.
I don't know. I don't know. I think at some point you have to be responsible for your own actions.
How much of this is a nightmare? Certainly, even for these young men who've got involved. One of the book was adapted in Vanity Fair, and you talk about how the neo-Nazis and white supremacists trap their followers in the movement forever. How do they do that, Ellie?
Well, it's very difficult to leave. It is a very harsh life inside these worlds. They might join for brotherhood, but they treat each other terribly. And at the same time, especially in the online version of it, they're constantly collecting little details on the worst things you've done. So if you step outside the line, there's going to be someone calling you fat, telling you reminding you of the worst things that have happened in your life. And then when they do leave, society hates them for what they've done. It is very difficult to hold down a job. So Matt Heimbach, he's an educated guy. He's a smart guy, went to college, but he keeps getting fired from jobs like working at McDonald's because someone will try to Google him, figure out who he is, and then he'll get a letter from corporate saying he's no longer welcome.
What does it mean, though, to be a follower? Do they pay dues? Do they wear a certain kind of clothing? Do they shake your hand in an odd way?
So sometimes in the organized groups, so Identity Europa charged $9 a month. I'm not sure what the dues were for Traditionalist Worker Party, but yeah, there will be a small amount of dues, and that helps pay for some of their activities. Most of the time, though, they have their followers pay for all of their activities, whether that's a protest somewhere or their website. Some of them had uniforms, so white polos from Identity Europa and black Dickies work shirts from Traditionalist Workers' Party. But I'd say the heart of the movement is not really, is more like an internet fandom, the same way you might be a fan of Rihanna.
Right, but isn't the whole point of the internet is you can be a fan of Rihanna one week, and then the next week you can be a fan of Taylor Swift, and then you forget it and reinvent yourself, and nobody really knows who anyone else is anyway online.
They get into these Discord servers that are pretty toxic. So incels in particular talk to me about this. I mean, the way regular people call it Twitter a hell site, it's that times a million in these Discord servers. They, again, like you mentioned, something that has happened in your life that's negative, and the hive mind of this subculture remembers it. So that when you step out of line, when you disagree with something, they will come back to you and say, hey, like, weren't you molested as a kid? Like, didn't your dad die? Like, didn't your girlfriend break up with you? They described it as having a loudspeaker to their ear for 18 hours a day, just screaming on repeat the worst things that happened in their lives. But they couldn't quit. They just couldn't get over it. I interviewed this incel in 2018. Part of me thought, like, if he saw himself on camera, if he saw his ideas in the cold light of day, like maybe he would start to question them. But 3 years later, he's messaging me at 7 a.m. saying he's been up all night chatting in his Discord server, drinking wine and eating benzos, and he wanted to hang out and ask me a few questions.
I just saw a movie, I don't know if you've seen it, I think it's called The Bike Riders, about motorcycle gangs in the 1960s. And in some ways, this all sounds rather similar. How similar is it, not only with biker gangs, but with some of the more urban gangs of the last few years in Los Angeles or New York or other urban centers?
Well, there's certainly this like emphasis on masculinity and a desire to project a bravado and a desire to have an ornamental woman at your side to validate you. But other than that, I think they're quite different, certainly in terms of social class.
So what are we going to do about it, Ellie? We had a show earlier this week with a New York University sociologist saying that we need to rethink the idea of masculinity, which is very abstract and ambitious. I'm not quite sure whether it's doable. what is doable in terms of addressing this? If indeed you're right, then this is an enormous concern to the future of America.
Yeah, and Incel once said something to me that I mean, I didn't think was entirely crazy. He was like, name one positive masculine trait. Like, you can't do it because if you say courage, it's implying that women aren't courageous. But if you say something like dominant, that's something toxic and negative. I think a lot of them are looking for a way to feel like men in a way that's like positive. And they're not finding it. I also think that American high schools are this horrible pressure cooker. A lot of these kids are bullied. That doesn't excuse what they've done, but like for everyone else's self-interest, it would be good if high school was less cruel to the kids who don't fit in, because some of them do seek out very, very toxic places as a way to vent their anger.
A couple of years ago, we had Richard Reeves on the show. He has a best-selling book of Boys and Men. He now has an institute. I'm not sure how familiar you are with Reeves's work and his new institute, but are you suggesting that we need to move in that direction in terms of studying and making sense of what at least Reeves believes and others to be the crisis of masculinity in the 2020s?
Yeah, I do feel like there are a lot of different ways to be a woman, and there are not so many with men. Like, I feel like in some sense, like the meek have inherited the earth. The computer nerds are the people who have the highest status jobs in our society. They are the billionaires, but they're pissed about it. They're very angry. They want to be the like muscular Andrew Tate type angry man who can dominate women. Like that's the only vision of masculinity that they, I don't know, that would make them feel valid. I don't know how to go about studying it, but it is something I see over and over again.
You mentioned Tate. I think he's in jail in Romania. Do you think that the FBI, other law enforcement agencies, need to be more aggressive in terms of tracking these people down? You've discovered them, so why shouldn't they?
I have talked to people at the FBI who said that after 9/11, there's international terrorism and domestic. It was split that way, and far more emphasis was on international terrorism, Islamic terrorism, and domestic terrorism was kind of the backwater until Charlottesville. So they were sort of behind in studying this. I don't know.
I mean, if I'm guessing Trump described the Charlottesville riots as good people on both sides. I'm guessing that if he wins the election, as most people expect him to, he's not going to put a lot of pressure on law enforcement to go after these people.
Right. So there's a massive federal civil lawsuit against the guys who organized Charlottesville, in part because the lawyers who led the case felt like the Justice Department under Jeff Sessions would not prosecute them. And for the most part, they did evade any kind of legal ramifications in the criminal justice system. There was one group, the Rise Above movement, that was prosecuted for conspiracy to commit violence. But I don't know. I mean, I don't think that Trump needs these super far right guys anymore. There's plenty of people willing to show their real face and their real name who take the ideas that are popular and discard the rest. The creepy Nazi stuff is never going to be a mainstream winner.
So he'll probably have his, so to speak, night of the long knives. How involved were these people that you cover in Black Pill in January 6th? And what's their relationship? You mentioned earlier their fear of the Proud Boys. Is there any overlap between groups like the Proud Boys and the people you cover in your book?
The people who got doxxed and got named from Charlottesville, they mostly faded from public life. There's a couple, Enrique Tarrio, who led the Proud Boys and was given a 22-year sentence for sedition. And Nick Fuentes, who has an internet chat show and was hanging out with Kanye West and former President Trump. The ones who weren't doxxed did move between these groups. The way I'm able to tell the old alt-right is if they recognize me. Sometimes they'll say, I'm like a meme to them. I don't know how else to put it. I'm not like a real person. So if they see me, they'll say something to like let me know who they really are. So there have been a few that were able to move on. But for the most part, mainstream society rejected the overt neo-Nazi stuff.
Finally, Ellie, you're obviously a woman. You've reported on this. They're aware of you being a woman. Is this the moment, perhaps, where women broadly need to step forward? Presumably some of these people have sisters and mothers. Even some of them have girlfriends. What are there women who are, so to speak, infected, who have taken the black pill?
Yeah, there were a few women in those movements, much more in QAnon and that world. That's a lot more inviting to women. But there were only a very few in the alt-right. That's because it was so intensely misogynist. It came out of incel chat rooms or was influenced by them. So yes, I interviewed quite a few women who were involved in it, and they were treated very terribly. I mean, I reviewed their internal text messages. They're shocking. They're saying things to each other like, I've been dehumanized enough for one weekend. Do not trust these men. I'll never respect myself again. A lot of them come in wanting a man who will protect them and respect them in this traditional wife role, but they never get that respect.
Well, Elle Reeve, the author of Black Pill, very chilling book, How I Witnessed the Darkest Corners of the Internet Come to Life, Poison Society and Capture American Politics. I hope you continue to do your important work. It's very troubling, but important that we know about these things. We'll have to get you back on the show, certainly before the election, to talk more about it. Thank you so much, and congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
I'm ready to attack Andrew King. Yeah, he's the one to bash, asking questions, no filter, just keeps on grinning. He's the man who's got the whole crowd spinning. Money, fame, success, it's all in his sight. He'll dig deep, expose you with all his might. No sugarcoating, he'll cut right through. Andrew King, he's the one to spew. Yeah, he's an expert.